Chicago, Illinois, January 14th, 1984. The wind off Lake Michigan was cold enough to freeze your breath in your throat, but inside the waiting room of the Cook County Hospital burn unit, the heat was suffocating. Frank Miller sat in a plastic chair that was too small for his frame. He was a steelworker, a man of callous hands and few words, who had spent the last 40 years believing that life was something you endured, not something you enjoyed. But for the last 3 weeks, Frank had been enduring a hell that no father should ever have to face. His 10-year-old son, Leo, was lying in room 402, a house fire, a heater that malfunctioned in the night. Frank had gotten Leo out, but not before the flames had taken their toll. Leo was alive, but he had stopped speaking. He had stopped looking at mirrors. He had stopped fighting. Frank stared at the hospital floor, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. He was angry. He was angry at the heater manufacturers. He was angry at the doctors who couldn't promise a full recovery. He was angry at God. And today, he was about to be angry at Michael Jackson. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments and the true humanity behind the legends, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell because we uncover the hidden gems that shape the icons we know today. The rumors had started circulating the ward at 8 a.m. Nurses were whispering. Administrators were running around in suits that cost more than Frank made in a year. The king of pop was coming. Michael Jackson, fresh off the record-breaking success of Thriller, was in Chicago, and he had arranged a private visit to the burn unit. To everyone else, it was a blessing. To Frank Miller, it was an insult. Frank watched the chaos unfold. He saw the security teams sweep the hallways. He saw the piles of toys being brought in by assistants. He saw the cameras setting up in the lobby. Despite the promise of a private visit, "It's a circus," Frank muttered to the nurse changing Leo's bandages. "He's using these kids. He's using my son's pain to sell more records." The nurse tried to calm him down. "Mr. Miller, Michael requested this specifically. He cares about burn victims. You know about his accident filming the commercial." "I don't care about his commercial," Frank snapped. "My son isn't a prop. He's not a photo opportunity. And I'm not letting that freak near him." Frank stood up. He walked to the door of room 402 and closed it. Then he grabbed a chair and planted it right in front of the door. He sat down, crossed his thick arms, and waited. He had made up his mind. The king of pop might own the radio, he might own the charts, but he didn't own this hallway. At 2 p.m., the atmosphere in the ward changed. The air felt charged. The screaming from the fans outside the hospital was a dull roar like distant thunder. Then silence fell over the corridor. Michael Jackson turned the corner. He was smaller than Frank expected. Thinner. He was wearing a military-style jacket with gold braiding, dark sunglasses, and that single, shimmering glove. He was surrounded by a phalanx of large men in suits, but he walked with gentle, almost hesitant grace. Michael was stopping at rooms, handing out gifts, speaking in a voice so soft it was barely audible. Frank watched him with disgust. He saw the performance. He saw the mask. As the entourage moved closer, the head of hospital security, a man named Henderson, spotted Frank sitting in front of a closed door. Henderson hurried over, looking nervous. "Mr. Miller," Henderson whispered urgently, "please move the chair. Mr. Jackson is approaching." "No," Frank said. His voice was like grinding gravel. "Excuse me." "I said no. He's not going in there. My son is in pain. He doesn't need to be stared at by a celebrity in a costume." The commotion caught the attention of the entourage. The group stopped 10 feet away. The bodyguards tensed up, sensing a threat. A large man with an earpiece stepped forward to remove Frank physically. But Michael Jackson raised a hand. The gesture was small, but it froze everyone in the corridor. Michael said something to his security chief, then stepped away from the group. He took off his sunglasses. He handed them to an assistant. He walked toward Frank Miller, alone. The hallway was dead silent. Nurses, doctors, and security guards held their breath. This was the most famous man on earth, a man who couldn't walk down a street without causing a riot, walking toward a furious steelworker who looked ready to throw a punch. Michael stopped 3 feet from Frank. He didn't look at the chair. He looked at Frank's eyes. "Sir," Michael said. His voice wasn't the high-pitched whisper Frank had heard on TV interviews. It was quiet, yes, but steady. "I understand you're protecting your son." Frank didn't stand up. He glared at Michael. "You don't understand anything. You think you can just walk in here, wave your glove, and make everything better? My boy lost his face in a fire. He doesn't want to see you. He doesn't want to be seen by you." The insult hung in the air. The security guard stepped forward again, but Michael didn't flinch. He didn't get angry. He didn't signal for help. Instead, Michael did something that caught Frank completely off guard. He pulled up the sleeve of his military jacket. "I know about fire," Michael said softly. "I know how fast it moves. I know the smell of it. And I know the pain that comes after when the bandages come off and you don't recognize the person in the mirror." Frank looked at Michael's arm. There were no visible scars there, but the look in Michael's eyes was raw. It was a look of genuine trauma. "I'm not here for the cameras, sir," Michael continued. "The cameras are downstairs. I'm here because I know that your son feels like a monster, and I want to tell him that he isn't." Frank's grip on his own arms loosened slightly. "He won't talk," Frank said, his voice cracking. "He hasn't spoken in 3 weeks. He just lies there under the sheet." "That's okay," Michael said. "I don't need him to talk. I just need him to listen." Frank looked at this man, this global icon who was pleading with a steelworker for permission to enter a room. He looked for the arrogance. He looked for the ego, but he couldn't find it. All he saw was a profound sadness that matched his own. Slowly, Frank Miller stood up. He moved the chair. 5 minutes, Frank said. "If he gets upset, you're out." "Thank you," Michael whispered. Michael entered room 402. The room was dim, the curtains drawn. The smell of antiseptic and burnt skin was heavy. In the center of the bed was a small lump under the white hospital sheet. Leo was hiding. Frank stood in the doorway, watching like a hawk. He expected Michael to do a song and dance. He expected him to be loud. Michael closed the door behind him, shutting out the noise of the hallway. He walked to the side of the bed and sat down in the chair Frank had vacated earlier. He didn't pull the sheet down. He didn't force Leo to look at him. He just sat there in the semi-darkness. "Hey, Leo," Michael said. "My name is Michael. Your dad is outside. He's a strong man. He loves you very much." There was no movement from under the sheet. "I like your room," Michael continued. "It's quiet. I like quiet. It's loud outside. Everyone wants something. Everyone wants to touch me or take a picture. Sometimes I just want to hide under a sheet too." Frank, listening from the door, felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected this. "You know," Michael said, leaning closer to the form on the bed, "people think I'm special because I can dance. But the truth is, I dance because I'm scared. I sing because sometimes it hurts too much to talk. When I was filming a video last month, my hair caught fire. I felt my skin burning. I thought I was going to die." The sheet moved slightly. Leo was listening. And afterward, Michael's voice dropped to a whisper. "People looked at me differently. They looked at the bandages. They stopped seeing Michael, and they started seeing a victim. I hated it. I wanted to hide. I wanted to wear a mask forever." Slowly, a small hand emerged from under the sheet. It was wrapped in gauze. Michael reached out. He didn't wear his glove. He took the boy's bandaged hand in his own bare hand. "But then I realized something, Leo. The fire took some of my skin, but it didn't take my magic. It didn't take who I am inside. Your face might be different now, but your heart is the same. And that's where the music comes from." Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out something. It wasn't a toy. It wasn't an autograph. It was a small cassette tape. "This is a demo," Michael said. "Nobody has heard it yet. It's a song I'm writing about making the world better. But I can't finish it because I'm sad today. I need a partner. Do you think you could listen to it for me and tell me if it's any good?" For a long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. Frank held his breath. Then the sheet slowly pulled back. Leo's face was covered in thick, white bandages. Only one eye and his mouth were visible. It was a heartbreaking sight, the sight that made Frank cry himself to sleep every night for a month. But Michael Jackson didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He smiled. A genuine, bright smile that lit up the dim room. "Hi, Leo," Michael said. "It's nice to meet you." Leo stared at the superstar sitting by his bed. And then, for the first time in 21 days, the boy spoke. His voice was raspy, weak, and dry. Is it really you?" "It's really me," Michael said. "Did you have the monkey?" Michael laughed, a soft, bell-like laugh. "Bubbles?" "No, Bubbles is at home. He's very naughty. He throws spaghetti at the walls. If I brought him here, the nurses would chase us both out." Frank saw the corner of Leo's mouth twitch. It was almost a smile. Can I hear the song?" Leo asked. "Only if you promise to be my producer," Michael said. "You have to be honest. If it's bad, you have to tell me." Michael put the tape in the small player on the bedside table and pressed play. It was a rough instrumental version of what would later become Man in the Mirror. For the next 20 minutes, the most famous entertainer in the world sat in a dark hospital room with a steelworker's son, listening to music, talking about cartoons, and talking about the pain of being different. Frank Miller watched in the doorway, and he felt the anger draining out of him, replaced by a shame that burned hotter than fire. He had judged this man. He had blocked his path. He had assumed that because Michael Jackson was rich and famous, he couldn't possibly understand suffering. But watching Michael interact with Leo, Frank realized he was wrong. Michael wasn't performing. He was connecting. He was a man who, despite the millions of fans, seemed desperately lonely, finding comfort in the company of a broken child who understood what it meant to be scarred. When the time came to leave, Michael stood up. He reached into his jacket again. "I have to go, Leo," Michael said, "but I want you to have this." Michael took off the black fedora he had been holding. He placed it gently on Leo's bandaged head. "It's a magic hat," Michael whispered. "Whenever you feel like people are staring, or whenever you feel afraid, you put this on. And you remember that you're a friend of Michael Jackson. And nobody messes with my friends." Leo touched the brim of the hat. "Thank you, Michael." "Thank you, Leo. You helped me today. You really did." Michael walked to the door. He stopped in front of Frank. The hallway was still full of security and staff, waiting anxiously. Frank looked at Michael. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to explain. But the words were stuck. Michael seemed to understand. He reached out and put a hand on Frank's shoulder. "He's a brave boy, Mr. Miller," Michael said. "He gets that from you." "Mr. Jackson," Frank stammered. I'm sorry. I was wrong about you." Michael shook his head. "No, you weren't wrong. You were a father. That's the most important job in the world. I wish." Michael's voice trailed off for a split second, a flash of longing crossing his face. "I wish I had someone protecting me like that." Michael put his sunglasses back on. The mask was back in place. The persona returned. He stepped out into the hallway, and the chaos resumed. The cameras flashed, the nurses swooned, the bodyguards moved in. But Frank Miller knew the truth. He had seen the man behind the mirror. Frank walked back into the room. Leo was sitting up in bed, wearing the black fedora, looking at the cassette tape in his hands. "Dad?" Leo asked. "Yeah, son?" He said, "We're friends. Me and him." "Yeah, Leo," Frank said, wiping a tear from his cheek. "I think you are." Leo didn't heal overnight. The road to recovery was long and painful. There were surgery, skin grafts, and years of therapy. But the silence was broken. The boy who wanted to die had found a reason to live, sparked by a stranger who took off his mask to show that he was broken too. Frank Miller never spoke publicly about that day. He didn't sell the story to the tabloids. He didn't sell the fedora, even when times got tough, and it could have paid off the mortgage. He kept it on a shelf in Leo's room. Years later, in 2009, when the news broke that Michael Jackson had passed away, Frank was 65 years old. Leo was 35, a father himself, with faint scars on his face that he no longer tried to hide. They sat in their living room, watching the news coverage. They watched the world mourn the king of pop. They watched the pundits discuss his controversies, his eccentricities, his mistakes. They don't know him, Leo said quietly, looking at the old black fedora on the mantel. "No," Frank replied. "They don't." Frank remembered the cold Chicago day. He remembered the anger he had felt, and he remembered the gentle voice of a man who stopped an entire entourage just to sit in the dark with a burnt child. People asked what Michael Jackson was really like. Was he crazy? Was he a saint? Was he a sinner? For Frank Miller, the answer was simple. Michael Jackson was the man who had looked past a father's rage and saw a father's fear. He was a man who didn't use his power to demand respect, but used his pain to build a bridge. In a world that wanted to consume him, tear him apart, and analyze his every move, Michael Jackson chose, in that quiet moment in Ward 4, to simply be human. And that, perhaps, was his greatest performance of all. If this incredible story of compassion, fatherhood, and the hidden heart of the King of Pop moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that you should never judge a book by its cover or a man by his rumors. Have you ever had a moment where a celebrity or a stranger changed your perspective on life? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more untold stories about the legends who shaped our world.